I'm Theodore 45 male. I'm a first-chair violinist for one of the most respected symphony orchestras in the country. For 2 decades, my life was a carefully constructed masterpiece of professional success and domestic tranquility, played out in a sprawling home in the suburbs of Chicago. I thought I had everything a man could want, until the day I learned my entire life was built on a lie, and a 60-year-old secret was my only path to redemption. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. For 22 years, my marriage to Veronica had been what I considered a harmonious duet. I was the artist, the talent, the man who could make a crowd of 2,000 people hold its breath with nothing more than 4 strings and a horsehair bow. She was the curator of our life, a woman with an impeccable eye for design and an even better eye for social climbing. Our home in Lake Forest was her magnum opus, a sprawling 2-acre estate of manicured lawns and rooms so perfectly staged they felt more like museum exhibits than living spaces. Every morning, the rhythm of our lives was as predictable as a metronome. I would rise at dawn, the resonant scales from my 1742 Guarneri violin filling my soundproof studio, while Veronica performed yoga on the terrace, a silent and graceful silhouette against the rising sun. We were a portrait of success, the kind of couple people whispered about at charity galas. Him, the prodigy, her, the effortlessly elegant wife. But portraits, I've learned, are often beautiful lies. The harmony had been fading for years, so gradually that I'd mistaken the dissonance for a complex new chord. The woman who once claimed my music was all the wealth she'd ever need had begun to speak a different language, one composed of stock portfolios, private jets, and the net worth of our neighbors. Her world had expanded to include the local country club, where she lunched with women who wore their husbands' fortunes like expensive perfume. She would return from these lunches with a new, subtle discontent, her conversation peppered with casual mentions of vacation homes in Aspen and weekend trips to St. Bart's. Our beautiful house started to feel less like a home and more like a gilded cage, and I was the songbird whose only job was to make it all sound beautiful. The name that became the destructive crescendo in our lives was Roland Ashford. He entered our world cloaked in the armor of new money and old-world arrogance. Veronica had taken him on as a client, a small project to redesign his Lincoln Park penthouse, a decision she announced to me after the contracts were already signed. "It's a fantastic opportunity, Theo," she'd said, her eyes gleaming with an ambition I hadn't seen since we were young. "His budget is practically unlimited." Roland Ashford was everything I wasn't. He was a titan of industry, a Harvard MBA who had inherited a defense contracting empire, Ashford Industries, and multiplied its value tenfold. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved through the world with the unshakable confidence of a man who had never been told no. By contrast, I was a man of average height who communicated best through the works of long-dead composers. My world was one of discipline, emotion, and art. His was a world of acquisitions, leverage, and power. The first time I met him was at a dinner party Veronica insisted we attend at his penthouse. The space was a monument to wealth, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline, walls adorned with abstract art that probably cost more than my violin, and a guest list of the city's financial elite. I felt like a court jester invited to entertain the king and his court. Roland greeted me with a firm handshake and a smile that didn't quite reach his cold, calculating eyes. "Theodore," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone. "Veronica tells me you're quite the artist. It must be a fascinating life creating things." The way he said things made my life's work sound like a quaint hobby, like macrame or stamp collecting. Throughout the evening, he held court, his hand resting on the small of Veronica's back for just a moment too long, his compliments for her design work flowing as freely as the vintage champagne. I watched my wife blossom under his attention. She laughed a bright, genuine laugh I hadn't heard directed at me in years. It was a sound that tightened a knot of dread in my chest. She was animated, vibrant, alive in a way I hadn't seen since our earliest days together. My grandfather, Eugene Brennan, had been a quiet man who found his voice at the piano. My father always said he came back from his time in the army a different person, haunted by things he never spoke of. His official record said he was a supply sergeant in Vietnam, but that he'd spent some unrecorded time in Cambodia beforehand. He played piano in smoky bars and officers' clubs, his fingers flying across the keys as if he were trying to outrun a memory. He died in a state-run nursing home, leaving behind little more than a bronze star we never knew the story behind and a leather-bound journal filled with his musical compositions. I inherited his musical gift, but I'd channeled it into the rigid, structured world of classical music. I craved the safety of the written score, the predictability of a well-rehearsed performance. As I stood in Roland Ashford's penthouse watching him charm my wife, I felt a profound sense of inadequacy. He was a composer of empires, I was merely a performer of other men's symphonies. That night, Veronica came home with me, but I knew with the chilling certainty of a final, somber chord that I had already lost her. The performance of our marriage was nearing its end, and I hadn't even realized the audience had already left. The final movement of my marriage was composed not in our sterile, silent home, but across an ocean in the grand concert halls of Vienna. I was on a 3-week tour with the Vienna Philharmonic, a career highlight that should have been a triumphant celebration of my life's dedication. Instead, it became the backdrop for my personal humiliation. While I was losing myself in the soaring complexities of Mozart, Veronica was finding herself in the arms of Roland Ashford. The distance between us was no longer just emotional. It was geographical, and she was using every mile to dismantle the life we had built. The call came at 2 in the morning, Vienna time. My nephew James, a bright young man working his first paralegal job in Chicago, appeared on my phone screen, his face pale and etched with an anxiety that made him look like a teenager again. "Uncle Theo," he began, his voice cracking with the same nervous energy I'd heard when he called me after his father, my brother, had passed away. I don't know how to tell you this. He worked in the same skyscraper that housed Ashford Industries headquarters. He'd been working late, catching up on filings. "I saw Aunt Veronica," he stammered, "at Mr. Ashford's building in the penthouse. The lights were on." I tried to rationalize it, to find a plausible explanation that would soothe the sudden, cold fear gripping me. "She's redesigning his office space, James. She told me she was expanding the project." My own voice sounded hollow in the opulent silence of my hotel room. "Uncle Theo, it was almost midnight," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "They were on the balcony. They weren't looking at floor plans." The words hung in the air between us, a prelude to a disaster I could feel but couldn't yet see. "What did you see, James?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. My violin bow, which I'd been holding, slipped from my numb fingers and clattered onto the polished floor. "They were kissing," he said, the words rushing out now. "And her dress, it wasn't all the way on. I'm so sorry. I took pictures. I didn't think you'd believe me otherwise." A moment later, the images appeared on my screen. There was my wife, Veronica, her body pressed against the glass railing of a balcony high above the glittering Chicago skyline. Roland Ashford's hands were tangled in her hair, his face buried in her neck. Her red dress, when I had bought her for our anniversary, was half unzipped, a scarlet banner of betrayal. The timestamp on the photos confirmed they were taken at the exact moment she had texted me goodnight, complaining of a headache. The world tilted on its axis. Every shared memory, every vow, every "I love you" was instantly recast as a lie. That night I performed the Brahms Violin Concerto, a piece renowned for its emotional depth and technical difficulty. I played every note perfectly. My fingers moved with mechanical precision, my bowing was flawless, but my heart was a block of ice. An Austrian critic later wrote that my performance was technically masterful but emotionally vacant, a description so accurate it felt like he had peered directly into my soul. I returned to Chicago 3 days later, walking into my own home as if it were a hostile country. I found Veronica in the kitchen, humming a cheerful Vivaldi tune, a portrait of domestic bliss. She was wearing a pair of diamond earrings I had never seen before. "New earrings?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm as I set down my violin case. She touched them instinctively, a flicker of panic in her eyes before it was replaced by a cool defiance. "A bonus," she said smoothly, "for landing the Ashford account." I let the silence hang in the air for a beat. "Must have been quite a project," I said, looking her directly in the eye. "Working past midnight, earning jewelry on balconies." The mask of composure fell away, replaced by a cold resolve I had never seen in her. "I'm not going to insult your intelligence. See by denying it," she said, her tone sharp and devoid of remorse. "I'm sorry you found out this way, Theo, but I am not sorry that it happened." She stood up, smoothing the front of her designer dress. "Do you have any idea how boring it is to be married to you? You live your life through dead composers. Your violin gets more of your passion in a day than I've gotten in a decade. Roland is alive. He builds things. He conquers things. He flew me to Monaco for lunch last week." "When was the last time you took me anywhere that wasn't a concert hall?" I was stunned into silence. 22 years of marriage erased for a lunch in Monaco. "So you threw it all away for a man who makes more money?" I finally asked, the question sounding pathetic even to my own ears. She laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. "Don't flatter yourself. Your money, Theo. Roland makes your annual salary in a bad week. You're a relic, a museum piece playing music for other relics. The world moved on, and you just kept practicing your scales." The divorce was as swift and brutal as a guillotine. Her lawyer, a golfing buddy of her father's, drew up papers that treated our marriage not as a partnership, but as my personal financial obligation to her. She wanted the house, half of my retirement, and alimony payments that would effectively cripple me. Her legal argument was that she had sacrificed her own career to support mine. The judge agreed. In the end, I was allowed to keep my violin, my car, and a small portion of my savings. The house, the art, the life I had paid for, it was all hers. The final decree came down on a gray Tuesday afternoon, and just like that, 22 years of my life were legally dissolved, leaving me with nothing but the echoes of a symphony that had ended on a painfully sour note. The cardboard boxes were stacked around me like miniature corrugated tombstones, each one marking a piece of the life I had just lost. I was sitting on the floor of my new reality, a sterile shoebox studio apartment that smelled of fresh paint and failure. My back was pressed against a cold radiator, the final divorce decree clutched in one hand, my phone in the other. The official end of my marriage had been declared by the sharp rap of a judge's gavel exactly 1 hour and 7 minutes ago. 22 years gone, my phone buzzed, a cruel interruption to my silent wake. It was Veronica. Against all reason, I opened the message. Hope you're enjoying the view from the bottom. By the way, Roland just had his grand piano moved into your old music room. It's a Fazioli. The movers said it's worth more than your entire net worth. Another buzz, a photo. Roland Ashford standing in my former home office, a smug grin plastered on his face. Behind him, where my grandfather Eugene's war medals and photo once hung, was now a framed Harvard MBA diploma. The composition of the photo was deliberate, a perfectly crafted image of my complete and utter replacement. You'll die poor and alone, Theo, the next text read, just like your grandfather. The words were a poisoned dart aimed at the one thing I had left, my family's history, my connection to the quiet, sad man who taught me my first notes on a piano. My arm was already drawn back, my fingers tightening around the phone, ready to hurl it against the wall and shatter it into 1,000 pieces. But before I could, it rang, not a text, but an actual call. The caller ID was a string of characters I didn't recognize, 00001. I stared at it, my anger momentarily replaced by a disorienting curiosity. It rang 6 times before my thumb, seemingly with a will of its own, swiped to answer. I held the phone to my ear, my own breathing loud in the silence. Theodore Eugene Brennan. The voice on the other end was male, crisp, and possessed a military precision that was unmistakable. Each word was enunciated with the clean, sharp click of a rifle bolt sliding into place. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice raw and hoarse. "Mr. Brennan, my name is Colonel James Whitmore. I'm calling from the Pentagon's Estate Recovery Division." The Pentagon? My mind struggled to connect the dots. I was a musician, not a soldier. My only connection to the military was the ghost of my grandfather. "I need you to listen very carefully to what I am about to say," the colonel continued, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Your grandfather, Staff Sergeant Eugene Brennan, was involved in a classified military operation in the Kingdom of Cambodia in February of 1964. The operation's codename was Night Music." I almost laughed. The story was absurd. "My grandfather was a supply sergeant," I recited, the words coming out automatically, the same family lore my father had repeated for decades. "He played piano in the officers' clubs to make extra money, that was it." The colonel paused for a moment. "That was his cover, Mr. Brennan. Your grandfather was a cryptography specialist attached to the 5th Special Forces Group. The mission he completed has been classified beyond top secret for 60 years. As of midnight last night, that classification expired." I slowly pushed myself to my feet, my legs feeling unsteady, the room seeming to tilt slightly. The boxes, the divorce papers, Veronica's venomous texts, it all felt distant, like a scene from someone else's life. "What are you talking about?" I managed to say. "During Operation Night Music, your grandfather recovered sensitive assets that have accrued significant value over the last 6 decades, Colonel Whitmore explained. Due to the highly classified and officially non-existent nature of the mission, he was never able to claim his authorized compensation. Per federal statute, that compensation, with 60 years of compounded interest and inflation adjustments, has been held in a secure treasury account. The current value is approximately $156 million. The phone slipped through my fingers, clattering onto the cheap laminate floor. The colonel's voice became a tiny, distant squawk. I fumbled to pick it up, my hand shaking so violently I could barely hold it. $156 million? That's impossible. My grandfather died with nothing in a state-run nursing home. My parents had to take out a second mortgage just to afford his care. Staff Sergeant Brennan made a choice, Mr. Brennan, the colonel said, his voice softening slightly. He chose a life of silence to protect his country and, more importantly, to protect his family from the repercussions of what he knew. But he also made provisions for the future. His provisions. The funds can only be released to his direct living descendant upon the expiration of the classification and only if certain conditions are met. What conditions? I asked, my mind racing. You need to come to Washington, D.C. immediately. There is a Delta flight departing from O'Hare in 3 hours. A first-class ticket, window seat 14A, has been purchased in your name. Your grandfather was very specific about that detail in his file. The specificity of it was jarring. How could he have known? How did you know to call me now, today of all days? There was another brief pause. Your grandfather's instructions were unconventional but precise. We were ordered to make contact on the day his direct descendant had, and I quote, lost everything of material value. His exact words in the file were, when my grandson has nothing left to lose, give him everything I couldn't have. My grandfather had been dead for 35 years. The idea that he could have orchestrated this moment, predicted the spectacular collapse of my life with such pinpoint accuracy, was terrifying and unbelievable. Eugene Brennan was a master at pattern recognition, Mr. Brennan. It's what made him one of the best cryptographers we ever had. He saw the future by understanding the patterns of the past, the colonel explained. The question is, are you ready to finish what he started? You have 72 hours from the moment of this call. If the conditions are not met by then, the entire inheritance is forfeited to the Department of Defense General Fund. I looked out my small apartment window at the choppy, gray waters of Lake Michigan, the same color as my grandfather's eyes when he would stare off into the distance, lost in a past he never shared. Colonel Whitmore, what did he recover in that jungle? The answer to that question, Mr. Brennan, is now your inheritance. I will see you at the Pentagon tomorrow morning, 800 hours. And bring your grandfather's journal, the one filled with his music. You do still have it, don't you? My eyes darted to the one box I had refused to let Veronica's movers touch, the one my mother had labeled in her neat cursive, Grandpa Eugene's things. Yes, I whispered, I have it. Good, the colonel said. One last thing, Mr. Brennan, your ex-wife's companion, Roland Ashford, his grandfather was William Ashford, founder of Ashford Industries. They were a major defense contractor in 1964. This is not a coincidence. Your grandfather saw this convergence decades ago. The line went dead. I stood alone in my empty room, the ghost of my grandfather suddenly more real and present than anyone else in my life. In a box across the room was a simple leather journal, which I now understood was not a collection of memories but a map. And it was a map that seemed to lead directly to the man who had just stolen my life. The red-eye flight from Chicago to Washington, D.C. was a surreal journey through a twilight world of grief and disbelief. I sat in the plush first-class seat my ghost of a grandfather had apparently reserved for me decades ago, the leather-bound journal resting on my lap. It felt heavier now, its yellowed pages no longer just a collection of sentimental melodies, but a cryptogram holding the key to a $156 million secret. For years I had played these compositions on my violin, finding solace in their complex, melancholic beat. Now I scanned them with new eyes, searching for the patterns Eugene had so expertly hidden. Each piece was dated, and with a quick search on my phone, I confirmed that the dates corresponded with major, albeit publicly known, military campaigns in Southeast Asia during the 1960s. But it was in the margins that the real secrets lay. What I had always assumed were idiosyncratic dynamic markings, crescendos in odd places, oddly placed staccato dots, were not musical notations at all. They were a code, a silent language I didn't yet understand. The Pentagon rose from the Virginia landscape at dawn, an imposing monument of limestone and authority. My Uber driver, an Army veteran with a faded 82nd Airborne tattoo on his forearm, let out a low whistle. "Big meeting at the five-sided Puzzle Palace, huh?" he asked. I simply nodded, the full weight of the situation pressing down on me. I was about to walk into the heart of the American military machine to claim an inheritance from a man I thought I knew, but who was in reality a complete stranger. Colonel James Whitmore met me just inside the security checkpoint. He was exactly as his voice had suggested, mid-50s, ramrod straight posture, and eyes that seemed to assess everything with unnerving calm. "Mr. Brennan," he said, his handshake firm and brief. "Welcome. Before we proceed, I have a few security questions for you as stipulated in your grandfather's file." I braced myself. "What did your grandfather call the old Baldwin piano he bought after the war?" he asked. I smiled, a genuine smile for the first time in months. "The unindicted co-conspirator," I replied. "He said it knew all his secrets but would never talk." Whitmore nodded, a flicker of approval in his eyes. "And what was the name of the stray dog he fed at the VFW hall every Tuesday?" "Sergeant," I said without hesitation, "because he only showed up for mess call." Satisfied, Whitmore led me through a labyrinth of sterile corridors and down 3 subterranean levels, each requiring a higher level of security clearance. We finally arrived at a windowless, soundproofed room known as a SCIF, a sensitive, compartmented information facility. In the center of the room sat a heavy metal table on which were several declassified file boxes. "This is your grandfather's real service record," Whitmore began, opening the first box. "Everything you are about to see and hear is still considered sensitive, even after 60 years. He laid out a series of black and white photographs. In them, a younger, harder version of my grandfather stared back at me. He was in jungle fatigues, surrounded by a team of soldiers whose faces were redacted with thick black ink. Operation Night Music, Whitmore said, pointing to a photo of the men standing before the wreckage of a small aircraft half swallowed by the jungle. In February 1964, your grandfather's six-man Special Forces team was covertly inserted into Cambodia to investigate the crash of a Soviet spy plane. Officially, we weren't in Cambodia, and the Soviets certainly weren't supposed to be there. He slid a translated transcript across the table. It was the debriefing from the mission's sole survivor, my grandfather. According to the report, the plane was carrying a prototype cryptographic device for encoding nuclear launch sequences, but that wasn't the real prize. The Soviet pilot, a man named Viktor Koslov, had survived the crash, though he was mortally wounded. Your grandfather was fluent in Russian, a skill he failed to mention on his enlistment forms, Whitmore said with a wry smile. Koslov knew he was dying. He was a double agent, disillusioned with the Soviet regime. He gave your grandfather everything he knew. The most valuable intelligence was a list of Swiss bank account numbers and corresponding passphrases. These accounts were slush funds used by corrupt elements within our own military-industrial complex to pay off Soviet intelligence officers in exchange for them looking the other way on certain business practices. My blood ran cold. What kind of business practices? Whitmore slid another file forward. It was a procurement report from Ashford Industries dated 1963. William Ashford, Rowland's grandfather, had a lucrative contract to supply rotor blades for Huey helicopters. His company discovered a manufacturing defect that could cause catastrophic failure under stress. Instead of fixing the problem and initiating a recall, he sold the defective parts to the U.S. Army at full price. Then he used a portion of those profits to bribe Soviet agents through the accounts Koslov exposed to ensure those faulty helicopters were deployed in low-risk zones theoretically. Theoretically, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The intelligence was faulty. At least 17 American helicopters went down between 64 and 66 due to mechanical failure consistent with the defect. 112 servicemen died. The room felt airless. My ex-wife had left me for a man whose family fortune was built on the graves of American soldiers. My grandfather had stumbled upon the evidence. He memorized the account numbers and passphrases, Whitmore continued. He knew he couldn't expose the truth without revealing the illegal operation in Cambodia and compromising national security. So he did the only thing he could. He chose silence. He encoded everything he knew into his music and waited. The colonel then handed me a sealed, yellowed envelope. My name, Theodore, was written on the front in my grandfather's shaky cursive. He left this with his commanding officer, with strict instructions it was to be given to you only when the file was declassified, and only if you had, in his words, lost everything material and could finally gain everything essential. With trembling hands, I opened the letter. Theodore, it began, if you are reading this, your life has likely fallen apart. I am sorry for that, but I also knew it would happen. I saw your father's romantic heart in you, you love with your whole being, which means you can be broken just as completely. The money the Pentagon is giving you is clean, it is yours, but it is not the real inheritance. The music I left you is a key, each composition is a set of coordinates, each rhythmic notation is a number sequence. Go to Baltimore, storage unit 447, the lease is paid for another 50 years. There you will find the truth I could not speak. The Swiss accounts still exist. The money has been laundered by time, but its origins are filthy. Powerful families built their fortunes on that blood money. By the time you read this, the name Ashford will mean something personal to you. That is not a coincidence. It is a pattern repeating. You have 72 hours. You can take the Pentagon money and live well, or you can claim what is in that storage unit and choose truth over comfort. Your choice. Music like truth has a way of resonating through time. Don't be afraid to play it loud. Your grandfather, Eugene. The letter was a roadmap to a reckoning, and my 72-hour clock was already ticking. The drive from Washington to Baltimore was a blur of highway hypnosis and escalating tension. My grandfather's letter sat on the passenger seat of my rental car, its words burned into my memory. This was no longer just about a surprise inheritance or the sting of my wife's betrayal. This was about a historical wrong, a deep and festering wound that had been hidden for 60 years. The storage facility was in a dilapidated industrial part of the city, a place of crumbling brick and rusted fire escapes that looked like it had been forgotten by time. Yet the security keypad at the gate gleamed, modern and new. I punched in the code I'd managed to decipher from the third movement of Eugene's Autumn Fugue, a combination of the mission date and his service number. The gate slid open with a quiet, electric hum. Unit 447 was at the end of a long, dimly lit corridor that smelled of damp concrete and decay. The lock, however, was a heavy-duty modern one, and the key from Eugene's letter turned with a satisfying, smooth click. The metal door rolled up to reveal a space that was almost completely empty. In the center of the concrete floor stood a single, drab, military green filing cabinet. On top of it sat an old wooden chessboard, the pieces arranged mid-game. I recognized the position instantly, the Budapest Gambit. It was the first opening my grandfather had ever taught me. You sacrifice a pawn, he had explained to me as a child, to gain a strategic advantage. You lose something small to gain control of the board. It was a message from the grave, a lesson in strategy. This entire situation was a gambit, and he was telling me that sacrifice was a necessary part of the plan. My heart pounded in my chest as I opened the top drawer of the filing cabinet. Inside, there was no mountain of cash or gold bars, but something far more valuable, evidence. There was a small, heavy key to a safety deposit box at Baltimore First National Bank. Beneath it lay a thick leather portfolio. With shaking hands, I opened it. The contents were a meticulously organized chronicle of treason. There were photocopies of Swiss bank statements from 1964, showing wire transfers from shell corporations linked to Ashford Industries directly into accounts held by known Soviet intelligence agents. There were internal memos from William Ashford himself, discussing the unacceptable but manageable risk of the defective rotor blades. He had gambled with men's lives and won a fortune. The sheer, cold-blooded calculus of it all made me sick to my stomach. He had profited from the deaths of the very soldiers his company was meant to be equipping. The blood money, according to the statements, totaled over $22 million, an astronomical sum in the 1960s. Just as I was absorbing the enormity of the betrayal documented in these papers, my phone rang, an unknown N. Umber flashing on the screen, I answered, my voice tense. Mr. Brennan. The voice was smooth, familiar, and oozing with condescending authority. It was Roland Ashford. I had a feeling you might be taking a little trip out of town, a visit to the Pentagon, perhaps. A chill went down my spine. How do you know that? I demanded. The same way I know everything that matters, Theodore, he purred. My family has had contingencies in place for 60 years, just in case your grandfather's little secret ever saw the light of day. We've been monitoring his estate and by extension your family for decades. We knew the classification was set to expire. We were just waiting to see if his heir would be foolish enough to come digging. He laughed, a low, arrogant sound. Your grandfather was a thief. He stole government property and tried to use it as leverage. My grandfather was a patriot who documented treason, I shot back, my voice shaking with rage. And your grandfather was a war profiteer who killed American soldiers for money. Semantics, Roland said dismissively. My grandfather was a brilliant businessman who understood that war is the ultimate market. Truth, Theodore, is a commodity. It's owned by the people with the power to write the history books. And you, my friend, are holding a losing hand, so here's my very generous offer. You have that nice, clean Pentagon money. $156 million, take it, buy yourself a new life, disappear. Leave that dusty old paperwork right where you found it and you will never hear from me or see me again. You can live out your days as a wealthy, forgotten artist, but if you pursue this, if you try to bring this into the light, I will crush you. You think losing your wife and your house was painful. You will learn the true meaning of loss. The threat was not subtle, it was a promise. The line went dead, leaving me in the silent, musty storage unit with a choice. For a moment, I considered his offer. I could walk away richer than I had ever dreamed and leave the past buried. I could be safe. But then I thought of the 112 men who died in those helicopters. I thought of my grandfather living a life of quiet desperation, protecting a truth so poisonous it had cost him everything. He had set up the board for a gambit, and it was my turn to make a move. I would not sacrifice my integrity for safety. I pulled out my phone and dialed the one person I knew I could trust. Dennis, I said when my cousin answered. It's Theo. Clear your schedule. I'm about to give you the story of your career. Dennis Riley, my cousin and a Pulitzer-nominated investigative journalist for the Washington Post, met me at a discreet diner off the highway an hour later. He listened, his expression shifting from familial concern to journalistic intensity as I laid out the contents of the leather portfolio on the vinyl tabletop between us. I told him everything, the phone call from the Pentagon, Veronica's betrayal, the meeting with Colonel Whitmore, and Roland Ashford's chilling threat. Dennis didn't flinch. He leaned forward, his eyes scanning the damning photocopies of bank statements and internal memos. This isn't just a story, Theo, he said, his voice low and electric with excitement. This is a legacy. This is history. The next morning, armed with a court order Dennis's legal team had secured overnight, we walked into the Baltimore First National Bank. The safety deposit box, opened with the key from the storage unit, contained the originals of everything I had found, but also much more. There were reel-to-reel audio tapes labeled simply Koslov Confession. My grandfather, a cryptography expert, had also been an intelligence operative. He hadn't just listened, he had recorded. But the true masterstroke was at the very bottom of the box. It was a single sheet of handwritten sheet music, a composition I had never seen before. It was titled Redemption Suite. As I hummed the melody, a complex and hauntingly beautiful tune, I realized what it was. The melodic patterns, the rhythmic shifts, they were a musical cipher. My grandfather hadn't just documented the crimes and the original accounts. He had tracked the money for decades, encoding the passwords to the modern, still active accounts into this final piece of music. He had maintained access. For the next 24 hours, we were a whirlwind of activity. Dennis brought in a team of forensic accountants who worked with the Swiss banking authorities. With the passwords from Redemption Suite, they confirmed the accounts were not only real but still controlled by a trust in Roland Ashford's name. The original $22 million in blood money, through decades of shrewd investments, had grown to a staggering $87 million. It was now technically clean money, but its foundation was built on the bones of fallen soldiers. "We publish tomorrow morning," Dennis announced, his face grim but resolute. "The Post is giving us the entire front page. This will detonate a bomb in the heart of the defense industry. Ashford will be ruined. And Veronica, she tied her wagon to a falling star. Are you ready for that?" I thought of my grandfather choosing a life of silence to protect his family. Then I thought of the casualty reports Whitmore had shown me, the black and white photos of young men who never came home. "No second thoughts," I said, "but we do this my way. The story focuses on the historical crime first. Let the world understand what William Ashford did. Then we reveal that the money and the guilt was passed down. And the money, the $87 million, it doesn't go to me. Every single penny goes into a trust fund for the families of the soldiers who died in those crashes." Dennis looked at me, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You're giving away $87 million. It's not mine to keep," I replied. "It belongs to them. The Pentagon money is more than enough for me. This is about justice, not profit." The story broke on a Tuesday. The headline in bold black letters screamed across the front page of the Washington Post: "Blood and Profit, DCLSSIFIDFILES revealed defense contractors' Vietnam-era treason." The story was a bombshell. The audio of Viktor Koslov's confession was released online, a ghost from the past speaking a terrible truth. By the time the stock market opened, Ashford Industries was in freefall. By noon, its stock had lost 60% of its value. By the end of the day, federal agents were raiding its headquarters, and a warrant was issued for Roland Ashford's arrest for inherited fraud, conspiracy, and massive tax evasion on the undeclared Swiss fortune. I watched it all unfold on the news from a quiet hotel room, a strange sense of calm washing over me. My phone rang. It was Veronica. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again and again, 17 times. On the 18th call, I answered. "Theo." Her voice was a frantic, panicked whisper. "Roland's been arrested. The FBI is here. They're seizing everything, the house, the cars, all the accounts. They took my jewelry. They said it was all purchased with the proceeds of a criminal enterprise. I have nothing, Theo, nothing." I listened to her frantic sobs, and for the first time I felt not anger, not sadness, but a profound and final detachment. "You have exactly what you chose, Veronica," I said, my voice calm and even. "You wanted a man who builds empires. You just didn't ask what they were built on. Please, Theo, I made a terrible mistake. He used me. I see that now. I'm staying in my sister's basement in Naperville. A basement. Can you imagine? I want to come home." "That house isn't my home anymore, Veronica," I said softly. "It went into foreclosure after Roland's assets were frozen and you couldn't make the payments. The bank put it up for auction." There was a stunned silence on her end. "I bought it," I said. You bought our house," she stammered, a flicker of desperate hope in her voice. "I bought a house," I corrected her. "My aunt and uncle are living there now. Their medical bills wiped them out, so I gave it to them. It seems like a much better use of the space than a cigar lounge." The line was filled with the sound of her ugly, gasping sobs, the same sobs that once would have shattered my heart. Now they were just noise. "What am I supposed to do?" she cried. "The same thing I did," I replied, and for the first time I felt a sense of pity for her. "You start over. The only difference is you authored your own ending. I was just the epilogue in someone else's story." I hung up the phone, finally cutting the last string that connected me to my old life. The music of justice had played its final resonant chord. 6 months later, I stood on the stage at Symphony Center once again. But this time, I wasn't performing Brahms or Mozart. I was debuting a new composition, a deeply personal piece titled Redemption Suite. The audience, filled with Chicago's elite and music critics, didn't know the story behind the music. They didn't know that the hauntingly beautiful melody of the first movement was a musical encryption of Swiss bank passwords, or that the somber, powerful adagio contained the rhythmically encoded names of the 112 soldiers who had died in helicopters supplied by Ashford Industries. They only knew the music, tragedy transformed into art. In the front row, my mother sat, tears streaming down her face, not from sadness, but from a profound sense of pride and release. For the first time, she was hearing the true story of the father she barely knew. My life had been completely remade. The $156 million from the Pentagon, my grandfather's long-delayed compensation, had been used to establish the Eugene Brennan Foundation for Veterans' Families. The trust fund created from Roland Ashford's $87 million fortune had already begun distributing funds to the descendants of the fallen soldiers, providing scholarships, paying off mortgages, and offering a measure of justice. See, that had been denied for 60 years. Dennis's explosive series of articles had earned him the Pulitzer Prize he so richly deserved. Ashford Industries had collapsed into bankruptcy, its name now synonymous with corporate treason. Roland, unable to be tried for his grandfather's crimes, was ultimately sentenced to 7 years in federal prison for tax evasion and perjury, a lesser charge, but a fittingly mundane end for a man of such towering arrogance. As for Veronica, I heard through family that she had married her divorce lawyer 2 years later. It was a practical, passionless merger that probably suited her far better than our life of art and emotion ever did. My sister once asked me if I regretted any of it, exposing Roland, destroying Veronica's life, giving away a fortune. "You could have taken the money and stayed silent," she said, "just like Grandpa Eugene did." I thought about that for a long time. Eugene didn't have a choice, I finally replied. In 1964, the world wasn't ready for that kind of truth. He couldn't risk the fallout, so he buried it like a seed and trusted that one day the soil would be right for it to grow. I was just the gardener who was there when the season changed. The real inheritance was never the money. It was the understanding that my grandfather's decades of silence weren't a mark of weakness or defeat, but an act of profound strategic patience. He had played a long game, arranging the pieces on the board with the foresight of a grandmaster, knowing that one day his grandson would be in the position to declare checkmate. I no longer live in a sprawling, empty mansion. I have a modest 2-bedroom condo within walking distance of the concert hall, filled with books, music, and the warmth of a life lived with purpose. I still practice 6 hours a day, but my weekends are now spent giving free music lessons to the children of veterans at the Foundation's headquarters. We've expanded our work to include music therapy programs at VA hospitals, using many of Eugene's own compositions, stripped of their codes, to help a new generation of soldiers process the invisible wounds of war. Sometimes I volunteer to play at nursing homes just as he did. I always end my performance with his favorite, Moonlight Serenade, but I play it in his unique, syncopated rhythm. Most of the residents just tap their feet, enjoying the familiar tune. But every now and then an old veteran, a man from my grandfather's era, will look up, his eyes sharp with recognition. One of them, a frail man with a Navy Cross pinned to his wheelchair blanket, whispered to me after a performance. "Night music," he said, his voice a dry rustle. "That rhythm, you know about night music." I knelt beside him and simply said, "My grandfather did. He just wanted to make sure someone remembered to play the song." The greatest truth I learned is that inheritance has nothing to do with money or property. It's about the stories we are entrusted to carry, the moral debts we are called to repay, and the choices we make when faced with a difficult truth. Eugene Brennan left me more than a fortune. He left me a purpose. He gave me proof that justice, even when it is delayed for 60 years, can finally arrive, its melody carried on the rhythm of time, waiting for someone with the courage to play the right notes in the right order at exactly the right moment. And that moment, I now know, was worth losing everything to find.